Talking Buckeyes. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Please join Pat on a regular basis. Check out the videos that Pat provided for us as we discussed the offense position by position. Now we get to the defense. And Pat, typically when the term loaded is thrown out there, it's concerning the offense. And Ohio State certainly has a loaded offense, but maybe the defense is even more so loaded than the offense.
It's going to be interesting to see. Everything we've heard and some of what we've seen from spring practice is that it's been battles between this offense and defense. With the defense, I would say having a little bit of the advantage, not all the time. I think you're close to 50-50 from what I've heard, but I would say if you're edging one way or the other right now, it's probably to the defensive side. And I think that makes a lot of sense given the number of guys, and we'll go into it as we go through each position, but the number of guys that returned on defense, and you add a big piece too. So I think as the offense is still figuring out offensive line and quarterback and some of the things we talked about previously, the defense has a lot of continuity. And even in the places where they are replacing guys who left, it's with guys who have mostly been on the field, have experience. There's just a lot of talent on that side of the ball coming off of a year where the Buckeyes played pretty well defensively.
Yeah, we see the numbers down below, typically top 3 or 4 in the nation across the board in just about every statistical category. Rushing defense, if you look at yards per carry, a little bit further down the list, but little to criticize from 2023. And you alluded to the great offseason moves, of course, that have gained attention. However, it's even more so the guys that have come back, and 2 guys, because of their 5-star recognition coming out of high school, because they came in at the same time, because they play a similar position, basically the same position. We could start with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau as being linchpins of what should be a strong defense.
There's no doubt when these 2 guys were coming out of high school, as you mentioned their rankings there, 3 years was the thought process, right? And that's the case with a lot of high school recruits, especially big-time recruits. But Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau seemed they're going to Ohio State. They've produced the Bosa brothers and Chase Young and, a number of other guys. But those 3 in particular that were highly ranked guys, 3 years onto the NFL, having successful NFL careers, you expected that out of those 2 as well. I think you could look at it one of 2 ways, and both are probably have some merit. Did they not do enough individually in their Ohio State career to set themselves up to be a high NFL draft pick? I think so. I mean, you look at JT Tuimoloau, everyone continues to think back to that Penn State game 2 years ago now and be like, that's the possibility. That's the ceiling for him. You just don't see it every game. And that's not to say he hasn't been productive. He certainly has. But I think people expected these huge numbers out of this guy. And instead what you've gotten is a more well-rounded player who can do a lot of different things for Ohio State, but doesn't necessarily rack up a ton of sacks or things like previous defensive ends. Then Jack Sawyer had a good start to his career his freshman year. Sophomore year moves positions to kind of this hybrid role under Jim Knowles, the Jack position. And it didn't really work out. And Ohio State quickly figured out that Jack Sawyer needs to be playing as a hand-on-the-ground defensive end. And you saw that last year. And as the season progressed and he kind of settled back in to the more natural role, the numbers really increased. I think the last 3 or 4 games was over half of his statistical production. And, you look at the Missouri game in the Cotton Bowl, Jack Sawyer was probably the star of the show. And if somehow Ohio State is able to score a touchdown or 2, he may be the defensive MVP of that game with his production. So you're hoping that carries over into this year. But either way, you've got 2 really experienced and very talented defensive ends coming back for Ohio State to kind of lead the pass rush and everything else that they can do.
Well, they lead the pass rush, and most of the pass rush, when people think of that skill set, comes from the outside. Is there depth there to the degree that they should need it?
That is the hope. Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, both junior defensive ends, guys that probably we're expecting to, as we're talking about 3 and done guys, we're expecting this to be the year that they really get the big opportunity. And with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau coming back, that opportunity probably isn't as big. but that doesn't mean it won't be there. And look, they're going to have to prove that they deserve to be on the field as part of a rotation. But the Buckeyes also need a bigger rotation than they've had in the past, at least the past few years, because if you're going to play as many games as Ohio State would like to, college football playoff, Big Ten championship, all that stuff included, you're going to need to try and keep Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau fresh, right? So you're going to have to rotate. And those are the two main guys that will be a part of that rotation, at least kind of as we stand now. Both guys who have shown flashes in the past, but haven't gotten that big opportunity. And, maybe this won't be the opportunity they expected, but I do expect a larger role for both of them. And I think that they can produce, the way Larry Johnson sees it, the defensive line coach at Ohio State, he needs to see that when JT Tuimoloau comes off, be it Caden Curry or Kenyatta Jackson comes into the game, the drop-off is small, if at all. And I know that's a high bar, but that's the way you're expected to do when you rotate in on Ohio State's defensive line. And that's the challenge for Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson this offseason, is to get to that level.
And so, Pat, if we go inside, of course, Mike Hall moves on. And then we look at Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams. And Tyleik Williams is the guy that stands out to me as the guy that has more often shown that at his best, he can be a game wrecker type.
Absolutely. 2023 was a great year for Tyleik Williams. He seriously considered leaving for the NFL, and it was a priority for Ohio State to get him back and keep him on campus. From my understanding, the conversation was, yes, you had one really good year, come back, show you can do it 2 years in a row, raise that draft stock. NIL certainly probably helped make sure that he didn't just jump to the NFL after one breakout season. So a big deal for Tyleik Williams to be back. Ty Hamilton, also a big deal, but more quietly, I would say. The numbers last year weren't as eye-popping as Tyleik Williams, but as you mentioned, they lose Mike Hall, and you need somebody in there next to Tyleik Williams, right? Ty Hamilton is expected to be that guy, and a guy who, kind of like his brother, Devon Hamilton, during his Ohio State career, just kind of got better each and every year. And this could be the season where you really start to see what Ty Hamilton can bring. He's going to be on the field significantly more than he was in the past. And, well, I won't say significantly. He's been on the field a lot as part of that three-man rotation really last year. And so those are going to be your top two guys that kind of have to lead from the middle. And, it's always hard to judge defensive tackles because they don't always put up the numbers. Tyleik Williams, kind of a guy who does. Ty Hamilton, maybe a guy who works more, off the stats page, but can still be productive for the Buckeyes.
Pat Murphy's here breaking down the Buckeyes. Please check out the videos on offense. Now we move to the defense, and you can catch Pat's work, of course, on Bucknuts 247 Sports. The most significant news for this entire football team during the offseason has been Sonny Styles' move to linebacker, because this is just a guy that just has so much talent. You got to find a place for him, and just finding that fit, whether it was safety or linebacker. But of course, he is now going to fill that role for a unit that, of course, loses Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers.
I think it's an interesting move, and one that most people expected because of Sonny Styles' natural build. I mean, he came in at, I think, 6'4", 204 pounds. That was going to be his weight heading into his senior year of high school. Remember, he reclassified to come to Ohio State a year early. So just naturally big, very big. And, he was fighting to kind of keep his weight down to be a defensive back, be a safety. You saw the production last year. It was good as he kind of rotated in that nickel role with Jordan Hancock for most of the season. And then eventually when Lathan Ransom gets hurt, he moves back to what Ohio State calls the adjuster safety position. But I do think, especially with, and we'll get to the safeties, but kind of the numbers that they have at that position compared to the linebackers, where you mentioned Steele Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, both gone, it makes sense to move Sonny to a linebacker position, probably something he's going to play at the next level anyway. He said when we spoke to him that he'd already kind of been learning just on his own some of the linebacker things because he did see that in some future for him. Now he's actually in the rooms, in the meetings, lining up at the position. So look, I've said this a few times this offseason. It's not a video game. You don't just move a guy to a new position and it just clicks. And I think you look at another linebacker in CJ Hicks, who played a little bit of everything in high school. It's taken him a couple years to get used to the way Ohio State wants to use him in a linebacker role. With Sonny Styles, because he's been on the field, because of his not only natural gifts, but football intelligence, things like that, you expect the process to go quicker, but you just never know, right? Well, the good news is it sounds like things have gone well. Sonny said there's still plenty he needs to learn about the position, but he feels like he's making good progress. And, Jim Knowles even talked about it's not necessarily Sonny Styles or CJ Hicks, though they will be competing for that second linebacker spot next to Cody Simon, the weak side linebacker. But that the three of them, because of how athletic Sonny is, could be on the field together and more three linebacker packages, if you will, even though Sonny can kind of play as that nickel corner if needed, or nickel safety. So I'm interested to see, once we actually get to see them play football, what that looks like, how often that gets used. But certainly Sonny gives you a lot of versatility as an additional linebacker.
So 3 players for 2 spots that could turn into 3 spots based on some different packages that they employ. Is there anybody else that could possibly work into the mix?
Arvell Reese is a name to kind of keep in mind. He's a guy who's generated some buzz. The second-year player. There's been talk about whether he would remain at linebacker, move to defensive end. Our Bill Kurlick reported a week or so ago when Ohio State had their first scrimmage that, from people that were there, that Arvell was doing some stuff at middle linebacker, which is not where I expected him to line up. So interesting to see if maybe he can work his way in a little bit, though I don't expect him to be a starter. I mentioned Cody Simon. I mentioned CJ Hicks. Gabe Powers is probably the other one I'd group in as a possibility if you're just looking for names of guys that could step in as a depth piece. He's in entering his third year. There's been some positivity about him and kind of what steps he's taken over the course of his career. Unless somebody gets hurt, though, or they have to change some things, I don't see Gabe Powers having a massive role this year. But I do like to hear that the progress is being made from a guy who was a little overshadowed because he came in at the same class as CJ Hicks, 5-star Ohio kid. Gabe Powers was a highly recruited guy, 4-star as well. So again, sometimes it takes guys some time to kind of get up to speed. And it sounds like Gabe Powers is starting to get to where they feel comfortable, at least if he needed to go in a game in a big moment, he could do that.
Folks, we have an Amazon link. You can find it in the description section of all the videos, and it's the same shopping experience. It doesn't cost you a penny, so please use that link when you shop on Amazon. Of course, hit the like button as well. Join Pat on bucknuts.com. As we move to the cornerback position, I was amused throughout the season because Davison Igbinosun, every time there was an ISO of him downfield, and I don't have any clue, I could look it up, how many pass interference calls that he drew. I don't think it was some exorbitant amount by any stretch, but there were a number of times when he was ISO to show that he played the receiver extremely well, and I would often kind of cringe or smirk like, wow, that was close. He could have been called. He is an aggressive cornerback.
Yeah, they've talked about him as the most physical cornerback on the team. The receivers have talked about it. Some of the coaches have talked about it. I think if you go back and look early on in the season, they were doing more press man with Davison. And as the season went on, I think they realized if you play him off a little bit, less chance he gets some of those penalties, at least early in the routes, gives him a little bit more time before contact and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, this cornerback room, honestly, we could replay a lot of what we said last offseason about these guys. Now, there aren't the questions maybe that there were last offseason. Denzel Burke was coming off a year where he had been banged up and hadn't played well. Davison Igbinosun was just coming in from transferring from Ole Miss. We weren't sure what we would get from Jordan Hancock, but we knew from talking to the coaches that they were really excited about what he could offer. But it's those three guys. And then if you want to throw in Jermaine Matthews, who played some last year when there were some injuries as a freshman and played really well, he's probably that fourth corner that could step in if and when they need somebody. But those are the three. And I think there's not many cornerback rooms in the country that you have more confidence in, given what they did the year prior. Denzel Burke, I think his coming back for his senior year could be, in the All-American conversation. Davison Igbinosun, I expect him to build on what he did last season. And, Jordan Hancock, I know, was irritated that he was not at least an honorable mention All Big Ten player with the way he played last year. As we talked about, Sonny Styles moving to linebacker likely means that Jordan Hancock will be the third, that full-time nickel, though they have used Sonny Styles' brother as a nickel as well. That could be a backup, Lorenzo Styles Jr. So I think those three at the top are the names you need to know for the most part. But they do have some depth there and guys that could step in. I didn't mention Calvin Simpson-Hunt, another guy who was the highest rated corner, I think, in Ohio State's 2023 class. He didn't play a ton last year, but certainly could see a bigger role if needed. Bryce West, Miles Lockhart. I'm forgetting one of them of the freshman corners.
Aaron Scott.
There we go. Those are guys that were all pretty highly recruited. Maybe don't make a big impact this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if, they at least get on the field at some point. So a pretty deep room given what is returning for Ohio State.
Aaron Scott, the number one rated player in the state of Ohio and a fifth rated cornerback. That's the 247 Sports Composite. And Bryce West certainly in the top 15 and a top 150 player. So don't put it past those guys to possibly make some kind of impact as they develop throughout the summer and into the fall. When you add it all up, aside from injuries and aside from, and you would not think that this would be a factor because you've got this wealth of talent coming back to prove something and to improve their NFL stock, that, again, the health aside and lack of focus would be the other. How does this defense not succeed and be one of the best in the nation?
I think you hit it pretty much on the head. The motivation should be there, right? Yes, they had a good defensive season a year ago, but they still couldn't get over the hump against Michigan. They didn't win in the bowl game against Missouri, though. I wouldn't say that had anything to do with the defensive performance. That was about as good as you could do with an offense that couldn't move the ball. It's about winning for these guys. And you've heard it from a lot of the guys we've mentioned so far as they've spoken this offseason. They came back to do a few things: beat Michigan, win a Big Ten championship, win a national championship. These guys haven't, and this is true about a lot of guys on the offensive side of the ball. They haven't been able to accomplish those goals in their careers. These guys didn't want to go out that way, having lost to Michigan 3 straight times and no Big Ten title, and only one real chance at a national championship with the college football playoff game against Georgia a couple of years ago. So the motivation should be there. The only thing I think that does derail things is, like you were saying, if the defensive side of the ball begins to lose focus, if things start off really well and they don't continue with that same level of drive and push to be at their absolute best, I don't think that will happen, but things like that are hard to predict, right? So, all the talent in the world is there. The motivation should be at an all-time high. And you're right. It would be surprising to see this defense take any sort of step back from what they did a year ago.
Let's move on to the special teams. Jesse Mirko turns in a solid career. Jaden Fielding, though, at the place kicker position, hitting on 16 of 20. He's back, correct?
Yes. Yep. Jaden Fielding will be back. It is interesting with the punting. The Buckeyes do not have a scholarship punter on the roster right now. Joe McGuire and Haji Jawad being a former, he transferred, but was played, I believe, Division II So no scholarship punter right now. Now they did land a commitment from Australian punter Nick McClarty a couple weeks, maybe about a month ago. He will be part of the 2024 class, but will not enroll until I believe June, sometime this summer. So that is likely your scholarship punter, but it's a guy who has played Aussie rules football, was part of this growing list of Australian punters, but hasn't done it in a college game before. So certainly we'll want to get him up to speed quickly over the summer and obviously into fall camp. I think that will be a quietly underrated storyline. If you're the Buckeyes, you obviously don't want to punt a lot, but it happens at times, right? And you need to be able to get that ball down the field. So something to watch on the punting side. But yes, kicker, long snapper, all those guys are back. John Froman being the long snapper. So some continuity there. The major difference is coaching. Parker Fleming, no longer the special teams coordinator, not with the program anymore. Ryan Day has said that he's kind of divvied up the responsibilities to a few different coaches, Brian Hartline, James Laurinaitis, Matt Guerreri. I believe there's one more that was in that mix that I can't think of off the top of my head, but basically the special teams duties are being split up among position coaches. The idea being that you sometimes maybe, and this is Ryan Day's words, the special teams coordinator is a little bit further down in the pecking order for players. You want to impress the head coach. You want to impress your position coaches. Okay, well, now the position coaches are the ones also running the special teams meetings. And the hope is, because Ohio State has had some issues on special teams, that helps turn things around.
Breaking down the Buckeyes on defense, it should be a stellar group here in 2024. Pat Murphy breaking down Ohio State football on a regular basis on bucknuts.com 247 Sports. Pat, we appreciate you doing yeoman's work on both sides of the ball for us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mark.